My parents kicked me out at 18 for being difficult, then paid for my brother's luxury life. When they lost everything and begged to move in with me, I sent them his address and blocked their numbers. The first time I realized I was the difficult one in my family, I was 12 years old. My younger brother, Grayson, had just dumped an entire box of cereal onto the floor while playing with our dog. My mom walked into the kitchen, took one look at the mess and turned to me with that look every kid dreads. "Samuel, why weren't you watching him?" she asked. I protested. I was doing my homework at the dining table. But it didn't matter. By the end of her lecture, I was grounded for not being responsible. That moment stuck with me. At the time, I thought maybe I'd just done something wrong without realizing it. Now, looking back, I see it for what it really was. The start of a pattern that would shape my entire life. Growing up, Grayson was always the golden child. He was 2 years younger than me, and everyone thought he was charming and easygoing. He had that kind of charisma that made people want to give him the benefit of the doubt. If Grayson forgot to do his chores, it was because he was busy. If I forgot, it was because I was lazy. If Grayson talked back to my parents, he was expressing himself. If I did, I was disrespectful. You get the idea. By the time I hit high school, I had started to resent the double standards. I wasn't a perfect kid. I don't think anyone is, but I tried. I kept my grades up, stayed out of trouble, and even got a part-time job to save up for my own car. Meanwhile, Grayson was failing classes and skipping curfew regularly, but my parents seemed more interested in making excuses for him than holding him accountable. "He's just figuring things out," they'd say. Apparently, I wasn't allowed the same grace. The real breaking point came when I turned 18. It was supposed to be this big milestone, freedom, adulthood, all of that. Instead, it was the year my parents kicked me out. It started with a fight over something small. Grayson had borrowed my car without asking, again, and returned it with an empty gas tank. When I confronted him about it, he shrugged and said, "Mom and Dad will probably give you gas money if you ask." That's when I lost it. I stormed into the living room and told my parents that if Grayson wanted to act like an adult, he needed to start taking responsibility. My mom's response was not what I expected. "Samuel, you've been so difficult lately," she said, her voice full of that passive-aggressive calm that makes your stomach drop. "Maybe it's time you learned what it's like to live on your own." At first, I thought she was bluffing. But 2 weeks later, I came home from work to find a stack of boxes in my room and my dad standing there, arms crossed. "We've given you plenty of chances," he said. "You're 18 now. It's time for you to grow up." That was it. No discussion, no warning. Just a one-way ticket out the door. I spent the next few weeks couch surfing at friends' houses while I scrambled to find a place of my own. I ended up in a tiny studio apartment with peeling wallpaper and a heater that barely worked. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Meanwhile, Grayson's life seemed to get even easier. My parents bought him a brand new car for his 16th birthday, and I later found out they were paying for his tutoring sessions, his new clothes, and even a vacation to Hawaii. They didn't even call me to check in. I wasn't angry, exactly. I was numb. It was like they had made their choice, and it wasn't me. One moment stands out from that first year on my own. I was walking home from my second job, exhausted, when I passed a fancy restaurant downtown. Through the window, I saw my parents and Grayson sitting at a table, laughing and eating steaks. I don't know why it hit me so hard, but it did. I stood there on the sidewalk for a full minute, staring, before I walked away. That's when I decided I wasn't going to let their rejection define me. If they didn't want me in their lives, fine. I'd build a life without them. It wasn't easy. I worked 2 jobs for years to make ends meet, saving every penny I could. I didn't have time for much of a social life, but I was okay with that. Every time I felt like giving up, I'd think about that night outside the restaurant. I told myself I'd never be the one on the outside looking in again. Eventually, things started to get better. I got a promotion at work, found a nicer apartment, and even managed to pay off my car. By the time I turned 25, I had a stable job, a few close friends, and a life I was proud of. My parents were still a distant memory, and Grayson, well, he was living it up on their dime. I'd see his posts on social media sometimes, pictures of him lounging on a yacht or partying in Vegas. I never liked them, but I didn't block him either. I guess some part of me was still curious. Looking back, I can't say I regret how things turned out. My parents made their choice, and I made mine. But sometimes, late at night, I'd wonder if they ever thought about me, if they ever regretted what they'd done. I got my answer a few months ago, when my mom sent me a text for the first time in years. It said, "We need to talk. It's important." I tried to tell myself I didn't care, that I was better off without them. But part of me still wondered, what did I do that was so unforgivable? Update. When my mom texted me out of the blue saying, "We need to talk. It's important," I didn't know how to react. I stared at my phone for a long time, wondering what she could possibly want after 7 years of radio silence. A part of me wanted to ignore it. I mean, what was the point? They'd made it clear where I stood in their lives, but curiosity got the better of me. I sent back a short, "What's going on?" and waited. Her reply came an hour later. "Can we talk in person? It's about your dad and me." That's when I knew something was up. My mom wasn't the type to ask for anything unless she had to. She was proud, stubbornly so, and always acted like she had everything under control. The fact that she wanted to meet in person felt off. I agreed to meet her at a local diner the next day. I told myself I was just going for closure, not because I cared about their problems, but deep down I think I was hoping for something, an apology maybe, or even just an acknowledgement of how they'd treated me. When I walked into the diner, my mom was already sitting at a booth, nursing a cup of coffee. She looked older than I remembered. Her hair was streaked with gray and there were deep lines around her eyes. For a second I almost felt sorry for her. Then she looked up and smiled like nothing had ever happened. "Samuel," she said, standing to give me an awkward hug. "You look good." "Thanks," I said, sitting down across from her. "So what's this about?" She hesitated, glancing down at her coffee. "It's about your father and me. And Grayson." Of course, it was about Grayson. It was always about Grayson. She launched into a long explanation about how their business had taken a hit over the past few years. Something about bad investments, a shady business partner, and the market not being what it used to be. I zoned out halfway through, but the gist was clear. They were broke. Not just tight on money broke, but selling their house broke. "And Grayson?" I asked, cutting her off. Her expression tightened. "He's struggling too. He got laid off last year and he's been having a hard time finding work. Your father and I have been helping him out as much as we can, but with everything going on, we just don't have the resources anymore." I let that sink in. After all those years of funding Grayson's lifestyle, his car, his vacations, his figuring things out, they were finally feeling the consequences. I didn't say anything, waiting for her to get to the point. "That's why we were hoping." She trailed off, glancing at me nervously. "We were hoping we could stay with you for a little while, just until we get back on our feet." I almost laughed. "They want to move in with me. The same people who kicked me out at 18 for being difficult." The irony was almost too much. "You're serious?" I said, leaning back in my seat. "Samuel, we wouldn't ask if we had any other options," she said quickly. "We just need a little time. A few months, tops." I didn't know what to say. On one hand, they were my parents. On the other, they'd left me to fend for myself when I was barely an adult. And now, after years of silence, they wanted me to bail them out? It felt like a bad joke. "Have you asked Grayson?" I said finally. Her face fell. "He's not in a position to help right now." Of course he wasn't. Grayson had never been in a position to help anyone but himself. "I need to think about it," I said, standing up. I wasn't ready to give her an answer. Not yet. She looked disappointed but she didn't push me. "Okay," she said quietly. "Just don't take too long. Please." Over the next few days I couldn't stop thinking about that conversation. Part of me felt guilty for even hesitating. No matter what had happened in the past, they were still my family. But another part of me, the part that remembered standing outside that fancy restaurant, watching them laugh and eat while I struggled to make rent, couldn't let it go. I called a few friends to get their perspective. Most of them were supportive, but one friend, Leo, didn't hold back. "Dude, they didn't care about you when you needed help. Why should you care about them now?" he said. "You've built a life for yourself without them. Don't let them drag you down." He had a point, but it wasn't that simple. I couldn't just ignore them, could I? Then a few days later, I got a call from Grayson. It was the first time he'd reached out in years. "Hey Sam," he said, his voice unusually subdued. "Mom said she talked to you." "Yeah," I said cautiously. "What do you want?" I wanted to say thanks for helping them out," he said. "It means a lot." "Wait, what?" I said, confused. "Mom said you agreed to let them move in," he said. "I think it's great you're stepping up like this." I felt my stomach drop. I didn't agree to anything. There was a long pause. "Oh," he said finally. "Well, they're kind of counting on you." That was it. That was the moment I realized nothing had changed. They still expected me to clean up their messes, just like I'd been expected to watch over Grayson all those years ago. I hung up the phone and sat there for a long time, thinking. I thought about all the nights I'd spent alone in that freezing studio apartment, eating ramen and wondering if I'd ever get my life together. I thought about the promotions I'd worked my ass off for, the friendships I'd built, the life I'd carved out for myself. None of it had come from them. When my mom texted me again the next day, asking if I'd made a decision, I finally knew what to say. I sent her a single text: "You should talk to Grayson. I'm sure he'll figure something out." Then I blocked her number. Final update. A week after I blocked my mom's number, I got an unexpected knock on my door. It was around 8 p.m., and I wasn't expecting anyone. My immediate thought was that it might be one of my neighbors borrowing something. Our apartment building was the kind where people were always asking for sugar or tools. When I opened the door though, I froze. It was Grayson. He was standing there in a wrinkled shirt, holding a duffel bag. His usual cocky grin was gone, replaced by something that almost looked like panic. "Hey," he said, shifting his weight awkwardly. "Can I come in?" I didn't move. "What are you doing here?" "Mom and Dad told me you blocked them," he said, his tone accusatory. "They're freaking out. They said they've got nowhere else to go and you're just leaving them to rot." I stared at him. "And what do you expect me to do about that?" "Samuel, they're our parents," he said, like that somehow erased everything they'd done. "They've been good to us, and now they need help. You can't just shut them out." "Good to us?" I said, my voice rising. "You mean they've been good to you? You know as well as I do that they've never cared about me the way they care about you. You got everything handed to you on a silver platter while I was out here struggling to survive." Grayson sighed like I was being unreasonable. "Look, I know they weren't perfect." "Perfect," I interrupted. "They kicked me out when I was 18, Grayson. I had nothing. No money, no place to go, nothing. And now they want to move in with me because they've finally run out of people to bail them out." "No." He opened his mouth to argue, but I cut him off. "Why don't you take them in? You're their favorite, right? Or is it because you're broke now too?" That shut him up. For a second, I thought he was going to leave, but then he said, "Fine, can I at least stay here for a bit? Just until I figure things out." I wanted to slam the door in his face, but something stopped me. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the part of me that still wanted answers. I stepped aside and let him in. Grayson dropped his bag by the couch and collapsed into a chair like he owned the place. I grabbed a beer from the fridge and handed it to him, watching as he took a long sip. "So," I said, sitting across from him, "what happened? Last I checked you were living it up on a yacht." He winced. "Yeah, well, things change. I got laid off last year and then the credit card bills started piling up. Mom and Dad helped for a while, but with everything going on they couldn't keep up." "What about the car? The vacations?" I asked. "Gone," he said simply. "I sold the car to pay off some debts, and the vacations, well, those were mostly for show anyway." I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and pity. It was hard to feel sorry for someone who'd spent years coasting on other people's generosity. But at the same time, he was still my brother. We sat in silence for a while before he finally said, "I get it, you know." "Get what?" "Why you're angry," he said, staring at his beer. "I know they screwed you over. And I know I didn't exactly make things easier for you." I didn't respond. Part of me wanted to believe him, but another part of me was waiting for the catch. "But they're still our parents," he continued. "And no matter what they did, don't you think they deserve a second chance?" I leaned back, studying him. "Why are you really here, Grayson? Is it because you care about them, or because you don't want to deal with this on your own?" His face reddened. "That's not fair, isn't it?" I said. "You're only here because you're out of options. You don't care about what they did to me. You just want someone else to clean up their mess." The conversation ended with him sulking on the couch while I went to bed. But I didn't sleep much that night. I kept replaying his words in my head, wondering if I was being too harsh. A second chance. Did they deserve that? The next morning, I woke up early and headed out without saying much to Grayson. I needed space to think. As I walked around the city, I started to realize something. This wasn't just about them anymore. It was about me. For years, I'd let their rejection define me. I'd worked so hard to prove I didn't need them, but in a way they were still controlling my life. By the time I got home, I'd made my decision. When I walked through the door, Grayson was on the phone, pacing the room. He looked up when he saw me and quickly ended the call. "Who was that?" I asked. "Mom?" he said, avoiding my gaze. "She wanted to know if I'd talk to you." "Good," I said. "Tell her I'll help them." His face lit up. "Seriously, Sam, that's... but on one condition," I said, cutting him off. "They're going to regret the way they treated me." His smile faltered. "What does that mean?" "You'll see," I said, heading to my room. The next week was satisfying, to say the least. I arranged for my parents to move into a rental property I owned, a rundown duplex I'd bought a few years ago as a fixer-upper. I told them it was the best I could do on short notice. They were grateful at first, but it didn't take long for the complaints to start. The plumbing was bad, the heating barely worked, and the neighborhood wasn't safe. Every time they called to complain, I reminded them of the rent they weren't paying and the favors they still owed me. It wasn't about being petty. Well, maybe a little. It was about making them understand what I'd gone through, what they'd put me through. Grayson didn't stick around long after they moved in. He came to me one day, saying he'd found a place to crash with a friend and thanking me for stepping up. I didn't argue. He wasn't my problem anymore. As for my parents, they're still there, learning what it's like to live without the safety net they took for granted. And me, I'm finally free.